Chapter 147, Disciplined. As we all know, those who have meritorious fame do not have to kneel down even when they see officials in the court, and everyone must respect them wherever they go. Hand over a name to an ordinary person's mansion, and it is not enough for others to eat and drink, so you have to give some silver as a gift. It can be said that there is no worry about food and clothing. Generally speaking, gangsters bully the soft and fear the hard, and they have to be a little blind, and not everyone in the capital can bully. Someone once said that this was very unreasonable. But some people say that when you are drunk, who knows who is who? Eventually, the thugs who beat the dead man ran away, and they didn't catch it in the end. Since then, it has become an unsolved case. In the previous life, Jiang Xuning was still busy thinking about the election of Princess Linzi, but she didn't have the time to take care of all the things in the imperial examination. Wang Ang's matter was also something she heard about after she married Shenju. Today, I was surprised to hear this person's wild words, and to see this person's wild behavior, and after thinking about it carefully, I felt that there was probably something to say about it. Push Xiao Shu to go and kiss. When these words came out of Wang Ang's mouth, they could really scare a group of people to death. When it fell into Jiang Xuning's ears, it looked like a root. Until she saw the soaring silver stock price of Ren Salt Farm, returned to Jiang's mansion, got up from sleep, and began to pack up all the matters for entering the palace after the New Year's festival, these words were still dangling in her mind from time to time, and they could not disappear no matter what. It's already afternoon, and the snow has melted. There were 2 chess books on the corner next to the window. It was Zhang Suiwai who came to inform her of the preparation, saying that during the days when she was not in the palace, although Mr. Xia led the way to pursue and exterminate the heavenly sect, and did not teach anything new, but another gentleman was interested in teaching the big guy to play chess, and he was afraid that he would continue to learn when he entered the palace this time. Jiang Xuning was staring at them now, stunned. Lianer was lighting the silver tickets prepared for Jiang Xuning to enter the palace this time and a few handfuls of silver bills in various styles, preparing to turn back and enter the palace to fight the palace people. It's just that she is counting, but she is pouting. Then he muttered, "This day of entering the palace, not earlier, not later, is exactly your birthday. At noon, someone from Mrs. Lady asked you to come over and celebrate her birthday with the eldest girl, and it would be good for you to push it clean up with a word, so that they can be lively over there. I don't know, I'm afraid I'll think it's just the birthday of a big girl. If I want to change to a slave and maid, whoever tells me to go, I will go, not only will I go, but I will live happily better than them. When the rules are so strict when I enter the palace, it is not good to have a big birthday again." Jiang Xuning listened to her strings, and when she came back to her senses, she realized that she was thinking about her birthday. Why didn't she go in the last life? Indeed, as Lianer said, not only did she go, but she was also happy. After all, it wasn't the same then. In the last life, she flattered Shenju, and the person who finally chose Princess Linzi was her, and it was almost a sure thing, so she was particularly proud, and deliberately wanted to find Jiang Suiwai and Meng's bad luck on a good day like her birthday, and in just a few words, everyone changed color. Jiang Suiwai looked at her for a long time. Then he didn't say anything, but told everyone else to disperse, and he got up to say goodbye. What Jiang Xuning hated the most was the calm face of the sister, which made her feel like a punch into the cotton, so she chased her out and called her to stop, and asked with a sneer, "Don't you like Shenju? But now His Royal Highness the King of Linzi wants to marry me. Back then, the dove occupied the magpie's nest, took my identity, and lived a good life without worrying about food and clothing for so many years. It's hateful that God doesn't have long eyes, but he still makes you live comfortably. Then I'll have to come by myself and let you know what retribution is like." Jiang Suiwai still has to go. She stepped forward and held back. She finally stopped, looked up at her, and said slowly, "Are you really happy?" "Why not be happy?" "Married the gentle king of Lindsay, and robbed the marriage of his sister who occupied his identity back then, and now he is still pressing his sister in the name of his concubine, and everyone in the mansion has to look at her face, and glory and wealth are just around the corner." Zhang Xuning felt that she was originally very happy. Can see that Zhang Suiwai seems to be unmoved, and the idea of happiness is as if she has grown wings and flies away with a gentle wave. On the day she really married Shenju, her head was empty and full of confusion, and the whole person seemed to be thrown into the clouds, fluttering lightly. "Second girl, although you don't go to the wife and eldest girl, but today is your birthday, and you still have to ask for one auspicious intention." Tanger smiled slightly, and actually took out a purse from his sleeve, and then took out a bracelet from it, and wore 19 small round golden bells with a red rope, and the workmanship was extremely exquisite. "When you were born the year before last, Yan Shizi asked someone to send it to you, a total of 20 bells, and one when you are 1 year old, and the slave has already added it to you." She handed the bracelet to Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning took it and saw it, and then she remembered in a trance that there was indeed such a gift. It was her 16 years old, and she spent her second birthday in the capital. Yan Lin took her to play crazy at the Lantern Festival all day that day, and when it was time to send her back, he pulled her to the dim corner of the alley next to her. The boy was probably blushing, right? He shoved this string of things into her hand indiscriminately, and turned around in embarrassment and left. That's Yan Lin to sending something back to the girl, right? She wondered at the time, and thought it was a little cheesy. But I can't stand the persecution of Yanlin, so I have to wear a bell every year and wear it on my birthday. Later, the Yanji Haufa fell, and she naturally never wore this thing again, and over time, she disappeared like Wanyang's jade bracelet. Now with this string of old things that have not been seen for a long time in the palm of her hand, what sounded in Zhang Xuaning's mind was that Yanlin, who had become a general, was still in power, bowed his head and half knelt in front of her, took out the string of golden bells that had disappeared from her for I don't know how many years, tied them to her thin wrist, and said to her in a soft voice like a dream, "Niang Niang, I secretly thought in my heart that when this string of bells is added to 20, I will be able to marry the girl wearing the bell home. But it turns out that Niang Niang has high aspirations, so she doesn't care about it." Tanger looked sad and happy when she saw her, and couldn't help but feel worried, and then suddenly remembered that the Yanji Marquis mansion had fallen. "It's all to blame on the slave maid." Zhang Xuning interrupted her and said, "It's okay." She exhaled softly, only handed the string of bells to Tanger, and said with a smile, "Didn't you say that it was a good and auspicious idea? Help me put it on." In this life, she and Yanlin have made it clear and broken off their relationship. There is no need to shy away from this bell. After all, the young man has a heart. She hopes that he is good, and he also hopes that she is good. Seeing her laughing, Tanger felt a little relieved in her heart, hesitated for a moment, and still put on this bracelet made of golden bells for her. Slender snow-white wrists, a string of small golden bells. The red rope at the end is tied with a thin lock and hangs down on the back of the delicate hand, which is gorgeous. Lianer couldn't help but praise, "It's so beautiful, I'm afraid only our girls' hands can wear it like this." Zhang Xuning shook her hand, and a thin sound would faintly come out, not big, but it was very light. She said, "Okay, let's get ready to enter the palace." The two girls of the Zhang family want to enter the palace to accompany them, and it stands to reason that they should go together, but Zhang Xuning has some nostalgia for Zhang Suiwai after all, and deliberately made an excuse that she hadn't packed up yet, so she let Zhang Suiwai set off alone, and she asked the house to prepare a new carriage and left 2 minutes late. Unexpectedly, Zhang Xuning sat in the car and drove through the 2 streets, and a few fast horses galloped in front of her. The people on the horses were all dressed in beards, wearing fur hats, foreigners, and whistling horsewhips in their hands, laughing at each other. It's a bustling street market, and they're not slowing down at all. The coachman of Jiang's mansion was taken aback. In a panic, he hurriedly drove the car to the side to avoid it, but the oncoming fast horse avoided it, but the wheels of the carriage hit the hard stone that was propped up on the stall when several vendors were setting up stalls on the side, and it broke with a click, and could no longer roll. Jiang Xuning was almost thrown out of the car, and when the car stopped, she frowned, and asked first when she opened the curtain, "What's the matter?" The coachman was shocked. A few totters came over on horseback, but fortunately the little one hid quickly, but the car was damaged and no one was hit. Jiang Xuning looked across the street. Those horses have long since disappeared, but people are turning their horses everywhere along the street, passers-by, and traders, all of them are scolding and scolding. Asterisk. Across the street from the secluded pavilion, Lucien sat by the window, frowning and looking at the piano board resting on the desk, which was obviously carved some time ago, and the beechwood and wood texture were all excellent. It's just a hard poke of a failure in the position of the left half of the palm. It's obviously crooked. There was even a little blood stained on the top that hadn't been wiped clean. I remember that this is the best of the few pieces of material I found for you 2 months ago. Haven't you already used it to chop the chin? Lucien looked at Xie Wei, who was drinking tea opposite, with a little dissatisfaction in his voice. An old tree grows for 810 years, and there are only a few good pieces of wood when it is cut down. Where can I find you a few pieces of the same tree or even the same one? Xie Juan, were you dreaming when you were chopping the chin, or did you hit a ghost? This can be broken. Xie Wei has been riddled with trivial matters recently, and seeing that the snow has finally melted for several days after the New Year, he came out of the mansion and went to the secluded pavilion on purpose. Naturally, he knew that the wood for this harp was hard to find. But if it's not hard to find, where is the need for labor, Lucien? When he sat with his back to the sash covered with snow-white window paper, he buried a small part of his face in the darkness, only put down the teacup, and said, "You bother, find it for me." Lucien Zhen is a head too big. He knew that since Xie Wei came in person, this Jean was afraid that it would be more important, so he rubbed his temples, and in the end he still called the people below to take out all the warehousing account books of the previous months, and rummaged through them one by one, trying to find a piece of wood with a material and texture similar to the current piece of wood, so that he could catch the piano that Xie Wei had cut before. After checking for a long time, there was no result, but it made his head flash, and he suddenly remembered something, and said, "You are free to come over today. That Xiao Dingfei has been lawless in the Quagong mansion recently. You should have heard of it, right? It's a thing." How many ridiculous things Xiao Dingfei has done in the past 10 days have all reached Xie Wei's ears, but when he was first in charge of the Ministry of Engineering, there were many things, and Xiao Dingfei was tossing Xiao Shi, so he didn't care much about it for the time being. But things in this world are too much, and it is not an overnight thing to bring down the Xiao family, and it is time to stop and plot after a while. If he doesn't restrain himself, I'm afraid that Xiao Dingfei will forget who he is. Thinking so, Xie Wei called Jianshuan and instructed, "Let Daokan go in person for a while, and warn him that his prestige has already been achieved. Don't make too much trouble." As soon as the words fell, there was a sudden commotion outside. Sounds like something is going on. Lucien, who was checking the account book, couldn't help but raise his head, pricked up his ears and listened for a moment, raised his eyebrows sharply, and actually pushed the window sash next to him open, and looked out on the street. It seems that the Tatars who entered Beijing a few years ago were in the middle of the city. When Xie Wei heard this, the tips of his eyebrows were also frowned, and he glanced out the window. There was chaos down there. There was also a carriage diagonally on the side of the street, and the coachman was crouching down to check the wheels, but next to him was a girl wrapped in a red satin cloak of snow fox fur standing beside her, and her face was as cold as ice. Lucien also saw it, and couldn't help but turn his eyes to look at Siewei. Asterisk. A group of Tatar envoys are really majestic. I really regard the capital as my home. Jiang Xuning came out of Jiang's mansion a few minutes later than Jiang Suiwei, and if there was no accident on the road, she would go almost next to the scheduled hour in the palace. But when I encountered this kind of thing halfway, the carriage broke down, and I didn't know how long I would delay in the middle of the road. She was about to say that she would hire a sedan chair nearby and enter the palace first, leaving the carriage to the coachman to deal with slowly, but before she could speak, she looked up and saw a person coming down from the secluded pavilion on the second floor across the street, walking straight towards her. I was a little surprised. Jianshu wore a sword at his waist, glanced at the carriage, and sure enough, it was broken, so he arched his hand to Jiang Xuning and said, "The second girl is going to enter the palace, right?" Jiang Xuning subconsciously glanced at the second floor of the opposite street. One of the windows was really ajar, and she saw Siewei's clearly outlined side face at a glance. After Tong Zhou came back, he hadn't seen him for more than 10 days. Siewei didn't arrest her to learn the piano again, and Xiao Dingfei made one good show after another, so it was rare for her to have a comfortable good year. This time she was going to enter the palace again, and when she was in the car just now, she pondered, and when she turned around, she would have to be carried by this young master again, and she would be low and small. Didn't think about it, and bumped into it before entering the palace. Jiang Xuning suddenly remembered Zhang Sha. He also got a promotion when he came back from Tongzhou, so he was probably busy, right? Although I was thinking like this in my heart, I didn't know why I was still bored. Siewei asked her to go, and it was indeed cold outside, so she naturally didn't have to refuse, nodded, and then explained to the coachman, went upstairs with the sword book, and entered the secluded pavilion. She had been here with Yanlin, and the layout of the museum had not changed much. The sword book led her further inside. Lifting a curtain, Jiang Xuning saw Siewei sitting inside. There was a brazier with silver charcoal burning in the room, warm. He was sitting under the window, wearing a pale green robe, and he happened to raise his eyes to look at her. Siewei was in the secluded pavilion, and he must have seen Lucien. But now I don't see Lu Xianren. Jiang Xuning's gaze flickered over the teacup opposite Siewei that had not yet been taken away, and he stepped forward to salute in a proper manner. "Hello, Mr. Xie." She folded her hands at her waist as she saluted, and the tips of her slender fingers showed a little, but there was a faint sound in her sleeves. Siewei said, "Have you met someone from Tatar?" Jiang Xuning couldn't help pursing her lips, thinking of what happened just now. She was still a little angry, and said angrily, "The student didn't completely bump into it. I really want to take a look. I'm afraid that what you see now is a missing arm and a broken leg." Siewei's brows furrowed. "On the 16th day of the first month, what nonsense are you talking about? The 16th day of the first lunar month is still my birthday. I don't taboo it. What are you taboo?" Jiang Xuning slandered him, not very happy with him, but he didn't dare to contradict it, so he had to bury his head and whispered, "Oh." Siewei could see that she was not convinced. After staring at her for a moment, he suddenly said, "These days with Xiao Dingfei, seeing him tossing the Dingguo mansion, and even carrying many things from the palace to you, you are happy to receive it, and you are happy to see it?" Jiang Xuning chuckled in her heart, but she didn't expect Siewei to talk to herself about it, so she immediately raised her head. But when he met Siewei's bright eyes, he inexplicably lost his courage. She thought, there was really no need to hide Siewei in this matter. Simply told the truth and said frankly, "Anyway, he is not a good person, and the students are indeed happy to see him tossing the Qiagong mansion." not only happy, but also cheering for him. The more the Kuagong mansion is in dire straits, the happier the students become. In the final analysis, your eyes will be rewarded. The words turned out to be a little tricky and domineering in the past, and the delicate eyebrows were even a little squeamish when they were frowned, and they didn't even bother to cover up. Siewei looked at her for a long time, and said steeply, "Right now, you don't pretend in front of me." Jiang Swining's heart sank. But after thinking about it, he smiled self-deprecatingly, and said, "Didn't I know what kind of virtue Mr. knew clearly? You are too lazy to pretend in front of me, what am I pretending to be with you?" They didn't know each other now. 4 years ago, the masks had been torn off in the barren mountains and valleys, and they had seen each other's worst sides, and now the more gentle and virtuous they are, the more saints and gentlemen they are, the more hypocritical they are. So she was more presumptuous to Siewei than to others. Isn't it polite for Siewei to talk to her in private? It was only before the words came out that the back of Jiang Swining's neck was cold, and she suddenly realized, I shouldn't say this. The experience of going to Beijing with Siewei back then should be buried in my heart, and I should not bring it out to say the first half of the sentence. This is Siewei's taboo. Sure enough, she slowly raised her eyes and met Siewei's extremely calm gaze. Jiang Swining inevitably felt that she was going to be unlucky, and she had to bow her head under the eaves, so she took the initiative to admit her mistake first. It was the student who said the wrong thing again. Siewei looked at her for a long time and said, "Stretch out your hand." As soon as Jiang Swining heard these 2 words, her scalp was numb, and she still remembered the beating she received when she asked for a silver ticket to stretch out her hand to Siewei last time. She remembered the pain. Not only did she not stretch out her hand, but she was so frightened that she took a step back. Siewei said, "What do you say about receiving Xiao Dingfei's things?" Jiang Swining forgot all about what he said wrongly, and shouted, "The student is a good player in this matter of tossing people. He took the initiative to ask me to teach him. I will give him some advice. He is not too much to deal with, right?" Siewei sneered, "Can you still teach people with long skills?" Jiang Swining still wanted to talk back, but seeing that his face had sunk a little, it was even more terrifying than just now, so he couldn't help but snort and stopped in time. There is a bamboo ruler on the side of the table. It's not the kind used by the teacher in the school, but the kind that Lucien invited back when he went to the temple to listen to the master's teachings. Just in time. Siewei copied it up, and still said to her, "Reach out." Jiang Swining knew that she was still going to be beaten. Her eyes closed, and she finally stretched out her hand. Siewei really wanted to give her 2 blows, so that she could have a long memory. But the outstretched wrist was tied with a string of small golden bells, and there was a small cracking sound when it shook lightly, and the red rope lined the skin more and more white. There is a faint old scar on the inside. The bamboo ruler he lifted did not fall in the end. Jiang Swining waited for a long time, feeling apprehensive, and couldn't help but quietly open her eyes without waiting for the expected pain. Siewei asked her, "Today is your birthday?" Jiang Swining's eyes lit up, and she knew that it was impossible for a person like Siewei to know her birthday, and she should have asked this question when she saw the bracelet she was wearing on her wrist, so she turned her mind and said miserably, "Yes, today's student is a little birthday star, but on the day of entering the palace, his birthday has not passed, he has neither eaten nor drunk well, and no one has made a bowl of longevity noodles, and Mr. will punish me." The students know that they are wrong, and they dare not do it again in the future, or they will spare this time if they look at the face of such a miserable birthday. Siewei didn't speak. Jiang Swining was a little bolder. "You acquiesced." She retracted her hand. But at this moment, there was a snap sound, and the ring ruler in Siewei's hand fell mercilessly, hitting her palm, so painful that she retracted her hand and grabbed it, and looked at him angrily. Siewei's voice didn't fluctuate at all, and said, "Today's punishment will not be left until tomorrow. Xiao Dingfei is such a frivolous and prodigal gentleman. If I were to let me know that you have had a close relationship with him, it would not be so easy to spare you." Zhang Xuning was shocked and frightened, looking at him with tears in her eyes. Xie Wei threw away the ring ruler, but didn't look at her, picked up the tea, and raised his voice to the outside. "Jianchu, ask Dayakan to take out the music in my car and send her to the palace." Jianchu came in and asked Zhang Xuning to go. Zhang Xuning didn't react, still thinking in her head, "Xie Wei is cold-blooded and ruthless. He really beat me on his birthday," and sat in Xie Wei's car with his hand that was marked with a red mark, and he was still angry. Dayakan drove directly to the imperial palace. When Jianchu came back, he saw Lucien, who had avoided going to the secret room before, and he came back again at some point, only looking at his husband with that intriguing gaze. Jianchu thought about it for a moment and said, "Dayakan sent Ning Er girl, so it must not be Gong's side, and his subordinates will go there in person." Xie Wei put the tea in his hand, but he didn't drink it. He looked at the ripples on the tea soup for a while, and said, "No need, let him go." Jianchu was stunned. Xie Wei's eyebrows frowned and seemed to be a little annoyed. He loosened the tea lid and let it cover back the teacup, made a sound, and then put the teacup back to the corner of the case, and said, "After all, I have it in my pocket, and there is no big thing." Book of Swords. LV Xian. He, now that you're in your pocket again, who said that you want to restrain Xiao Dingfei and tell him to make less trouble?